Hello everyone. I want to do a very short little addendum video to my last session 2. I want to just do a brief deep dive and talk into about writing and writing combat. This is kind of funny because if you watched my session 2 video, you got a chance to see a rather crazy and dramatic fight between our hero, Isaac Loosejaw, and the crazy, huge, wild boar. I don't really call him a wild boar in here, though. What do they call him? It's a Cassidon. Is that what they call it? Something like that. Let me quickly. I don't need to pull him up. But hey, I'm going to pull him up. There we go. Calydon. Look at that. Look at that mammoth monster here. I was biting off a lot, having a ferocity 2 animal here with 52 hit points, fighting monster on my first encounter. But we won. I think it was a pretty good victory. Well, I guess we'll discuss any fallout of that session 3 as I begin my next video. But I just want to talk about writing combat. I think, as I've mentioned before in the past, there really isn't a lot of rules. It's kind of funny. So the only thing on writing and writing combat is just over here. Boop, boop, boop. I'm going to make it here, writing animals. This really isn't a lot to it. The advantage to writing an animal really is you get a little bit extra movement on the overland map. Of course, you get gear. They can carry some equipment for you. That's for your normal mounts. I guess that's kind of the best advantage for them. For combat, it's a little tricky. So, I mean, like I said, the rules are very light. In general, Dragonbane, I would not call Dragonbane a light rule book. I mean, look at all the rules in here. I'd say it's a pretty full section. It's not one of those rule lights OSR games. This is Dragonbane is a very full rules game. Although not nearly as crazy as some Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that. Not even anywhere close to the amount of book of knowledge you have to play Dungeons and Dragons. But the funny thing about writing combat is, for one, I mean, I'm pretty sure as a player and a GM, I didn't really read these much before I started playing. I thought it would never be a thing that would happen. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, having a horse, that might be something that's more common, but a combat trained horse, who's going to ever have a combat trained horse? The only one who's ever going to have a combat trained horse is indeed a knight who starts the game with it by rolling a 5-6 on the starting gear. So that, or I guess chooses that. I guess if they intentionally want to have a combat trained horse. But that's it. I mean, otherwise, a combat trained horse costs 400 gold. What character is going to save up 400 gold to buy a combat trained horse? It's the second most expensive item in the entire game. If you're someone who's melee oriented, and you think you're going to be getting into fights and you want to spend a large amount of money, you're not going to be spending it on a combat trained horse. You're going to be coming over here and spending 500 gold on plate armor. I mean, that's going to be your first purchase. Maybe if you're a knight who rolled plate armor and then you're looking for your purchase, then maybe 90% of the people playing this game, the GMs running this game, will never experience writing combat. You're never going to see it. Unless for some reason there's a specific thing that someone's doing, it's never going to occur. So that's probably why there's only a paragraph of rules involving writing combat. Yet, somehow, by some quirky miracle, random rules of fate, we're going to be seeing it a lot more in my campaign, because I've got, my mounted knight and his lovely direwolf mount companion, Pork Chop. Pork Chop almost got killed by a walking pork chop. But the irony is real. The irony is real. I saved his life a little bit. You know, he got down to 0 hit points. According to the rules, he'd be considered dead. But being as I hadn't really experienced much of it yet, I kind of really need to see what was going on. Let's talk a little bit more about riding combat. I already discussed the movement benefit for normal horses, any horses. Once again, this is another one of those things like, as a DM in Dragonbane, you know, most of Dragonbane is kind of a theater of the mind sort of thing. You know, I am not sure there are a whole lot of DMs out there really detail-wise tracking mounted movement and non-mounted movement. The advantage to be able to move, you know, 20 meters in combat, that's pretty much this whole grid. I think right here, I could dash all the way from one end of this corner to the other and mount combat. But once again, I just, Dragonbane is mostly theater of the mind. I don't know too many DMs who go into a lot of detailed war game style combat in Dragonbane, which makes mounted combat another one of those things. Like, I can go anywhere, so I might as well move 20 squares. Good, I'm in combat, less than done. Anyway, I think I nailed it. I think for the most part, most DMs are never going to really deal with that kind of movement speed. I think it's mostly theater of the mind kind of stuff. Very small perk to be able to move at the rate of your mount. The biggest perk for being in mounted combat is that enemies on the ground have a bane to attack you being mounted. That's a nice plus. Your average NPC trying to attack you from the ground, having a bane to roll to hit you, that's a really good plus. That's probably the number one advantage to mounted combat. The third little smaller secret advantage to rider combat is that, well, technically you have an extra hit point pool, because monsters or NPCs have to choose whether to attack you or your mount. You additionally sort of have your mount's hit point along with your hit point, depending how the rolls go or tell me what they choose to do. You have an extra hit point pool when you have a mount, deal with. So not only do I have Izik's main 14 hit points, I have, Pork Chop's 16 hit points. That's like a pretty huge pool of hit points to deal with. I suppose that's a good minor advantage, although once again, if your mount gets to 0 hit points and dies, with mounts costing 400 gold to replace for a trained mount, that is like running your Lamborghini off a cliff and totaling it without any car insurance. I mean, you do not want to lose your mount. I mean, it's so expensive, you would never be able to replace it. Or it would take you towards the end game to ever replace your mount. So you have to ask yourself, is the risk worth the reward? I don't know. And here's the tricky thing, which I probably didn't really think about or factor in, when you're in this sort of thing. If you're fighting monsters, well, monsters don't need to roll to hit, of course. They automatically hit. They just roll for damage, which means the bane, to hit you does not exist. I have to really ask, is the advantage of having an additional hit point pool for a mount that has a chance to die in 2 rounds, possibly even a round, depending on what you're fighting, really worth the risk? Mounted combat's a weird one. I'm very unsure whether it's really worth it. I think probably against NPCs, because, if you have that bane to hit you, that's a pretty big advantage. But against monsters where you can take so much damage, I just don't know. And to make matters worse, I mean, there is a big disadvantage for mounted combat as well. You use your riding skill for your attacks and parries and even evade. So you have to use your riding skill for all your stats. If we're being honest here, good thing. I mean, good thing I went back and changed my character sheet and chose to take the writing profession and got rid of it being in hunting and fishing like I'd originally started. By the way, I did check evade here by accident because it wasn't evade, it was writing. So I'm gonna remove that here if anyone noticed that. So I don't have a skill up on my evade. But you know, my writing skill is lower than my melee combat skill. So, and you have to choose the lowest of the two. So not only are you committed to taking writing as one of your main skills, can you imagine trying to go into battle with like a 5 or 6 writing, and that being both your evade and your combat? You would die. You wouldn't win. So if you were going to go with a mounted combat horse, you are committed to taking the riding skill. You have to. I can't imagine you surviving without it. So you're committed to riding, but not only that, you know, when you are in combat, you got to use the lowest value between your evade, your riding, and your melee skills. You've got to use the lowest of all those. If I was on the ground, I could have, you know, been using a 12 melee skill with my sword as compared to the 10 with my riding. So it has a negative side effect as well. So, like I said, it's one of those things which I just don't think 90% of people playing Dragonbane are ever going to experience it. And why would they? I can't think of any Let's Play I've ever seen or anyone had mounted combat going on. But we're going to have it. It's going to happen. But I think I've learned a little bit. I think, one, probably against monsters, I am just better off dismounting, you know, and just fighting them, because that losing a Bane on attack and just having to fight like normal, probably too rough, you know, because I'm already losing attack, you know, being mounted as it is. Not being able, you know, having the monster hit me automatically, you know, is a lot to bear, along with losing some of your combat skills. I don't know if having the extra hit point and risking your mount's life, you know, is really worth it. I mean, your mount can only take, you know, 1 or 2 hits. Is it worth having that risk against a monster? I just don't know. I don't think so. So I'll have to make some decisions when it comes to those things in the future. One other thing it doesn't really talk about, and I don't know, you know, if you are going to do, you know, mounted combat, you know, like I said, the enemies have to choose whether to target you or your mount. That seems to indicate that you and your mount are treated separately. I mean, if the monster has to choose which ones to attack, that seems to make sense to me. I chose to allow my wolf to have his own initiative, have her own initiative and attack. I was, you know, even a horse, I would assume that your combat trained horse would fight alongside you, even though you're on her, allowing you to have her own, you know, initiative pool. But there's nothing that really says that in here. You know, I've looked all over. There's no talk of that. I think that's maybe a quote-unquote house rule, I suppose. But it's a logical one. I mean, like I said, because you and your mount are treated separately by the enemy, I guess it seems to me it would only make sense that you should be treated separately on the offensive side of things as well. But there's nothing here that talks about it. You're not treated as a single unit, you know, in combat in such a way. So there you go. I think that's that. I think I handled the combat just fine. You know, but other than having the inexperience and really kind of figuring out how to deal with it, you know, I think you really have to wrestle, you know, when is it worth it and when is it not worth it. This was a very tough battle for me to go up against, but going up against monsters in mounted combat, very dangerous choice, you know, to say the least. The other house rule, I think, as a solo player though, one of the things I was thinking about, I'm definitely going to instigate this house rule because I think it's funny. It kind of makes sense. Once again, I think usually you're probably the only character that's really going to have mounted combat. Maybe a fighter if you're really going to go for it, but boy, that's a lot of investment for a fighter. I think the only one really is going to happen to is going to be a knight, you know, and that's if you choose it in your starting gear. That's it. But, you know, as a solo player, I talked about how absolutely and utterly useless the knights heroic ability is Guardian, because I'm a solo player. I'm the only one here playing by myself, so I'll never get a chance to use that skill. But you know what? I think we're making a little house rule. I don't see why I can't use the Guardian skill to help protect my mount from damage. I mean, I think it makes sense to me. Let me quickly read the Guardian skill here for you. You do not hesitate to take a hit to protect your friends. If you and another player character within 2 meters of the same enemy, and the enemy attacks the other character, you can activate this ability to force him to attack you instead. Using this ability can be done out of turn. It does not count as an action. I think I should enact a house rule that, you know, if the enemy attacks my mount, I can use my Guardian ability and have him force him to attack me instead. Perfect. And then I can finally use the Guardian ability and spend some willpower points for a change. So I think maybe with that addendum, suddenly it would totally make much more sense for me to have, you know, my mount used in combat that way. That way I can make sure that if there's a killing blow coming in, I can divert that attack to me. At least I have armor, you know, and I might be able to take a better hit than my dire wolf. Anyway, that's all I wanted to talk. Just a brief deep dive into the concept of riding and mounted combat in Dragonbane. Something, to be honest, you will probably never ever see anytime you play Dragonbane, but we're gonna see it here from time to time. Take care. Thanks for listening to my little deep dive.